In the mythic imagination of Ireland, the land itself is alive, sentient, sacred, and storied. The rivers remember, the mountains speak, and the winds carry whispers of gods and spirits. Among these ancient presences, one figure looms large in both folk tradition and deeper mythological strata, the Cailleach. Known variously as the Veiled One, the Haggard Winter, or the Old Woman in the Mountains, the Cailleach is one of the oldest and most enigmatic figures in the Irish mythological landscape. She is not a goddess in the classical pantheon sense, but something more primal, a personification of time, weather, death, and the rugged terrain of Ireland itself. As a seasonal sovereign, she rules over winter's reign, calling forth storms and shaping the land with her great staff or hammer. Her fingerprints are said to mark the mountains and stones of the western seaboard and inland cairns alike. And yet, despite her harshness, she is not a force of evil. Rather, she embodies the deep cycles of life, death, and rebirth found in both nature and myth. In early Irish paganism and later folk traditions, the Cailleach represents not only the brutal beauty of winter, but also the wisdom that comes with age, the stillness before growth, and the awe-inspiring power of the untamed world. Her stories, scattered across the island from Beara to Loughcrew, suggest an ancient reverence for the land and its shapers, and a cosmology where time, terrain, and spirit converge in female form. But who exactly is the Cailleach? Is she a deity, a folk memory, or geological metaphor? Where did she come from? And how did her myth survive centuries of cultural and religious change? What can she teach us about the early Irish people, how they viewed their environment, their seasons, and their spiritual world? These are the questions in this video we'll explore, chapter by chapter, and in doing so, we aim to reconstruct not only the myth of the Cailleach, but also the worldview that gave birth to her. A worldview rooted in earth, weather, memory, and story. Na dé guibh cóide, agus fáilte ar an glór seo. If you like this video, please support us by liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, or alternatively, if you go to the description, you can go to a link where you can donate a coffee for the upkeep of the channel. Wheel Buéchas a cóide. The Cailleach is one of the most enduring figures in Irish myth and folklore, yet she remains amongst the most mysterious. Unlike the Tuatha Dé Danann, whose stories are codified in medieval manuscripts, or the saints of Christian Ireland, whose lives were recorded by scribes, the Cailleach emerges from mist to time with no single origin point. Instead, she seems to be a composite, an amalgamation of prehistoric nature deity, ancestral spirit, sovereignty figure, and land personification, preserved in regional folklore and oral tradition across Ireland and the broader Gaelic world. The word Cailleach comes from the Old Irish, derived from Cailleach, meaning veil, and by extension Cailleach, veiled one or veiled woman. In classical Latin and medieval Irish texts, the term is also used to refer to nuns or reclusive women devoted to religious life. However, the pagan Cailleach long predates these associations. Her name may suggest a being who is hidden or mysterious, veiled in both a literal and symbolic sense, representing hidden knowledge, the unseen forces of nature, or the obscured world of spirits and ancestors. Veiling may also indicate a ritualistic or spiritual status, as women who wore veils in various ancient traditions were often priestesses or oracles. In the case of the Cailleach, the veil could imply a boundary between worlds, the unseen and seen, life and death, the fertile and the barren. While there is no surviving mythological cycle explicitly dedicated to the Cailleach in early Irish literature, many scholars argue that she belongs to a stratum of belief far older than the medieval manuscripts. Her traits suggest a connection with the so-called Old European Mother Goddess archetypes proposed by scholars like Maria Gumtus. She is ancient, wild, connected to mountains and stones, and appears to govern the cycles of life and land rather than individual human affairs. Some interpretations have viewed the Cailleach as a fragment of prehistoric earth goddess, the kind of chthonic or underworld or earth-based deity worshipped before the rise of sky gods and warrior pantheons. Her connections to rocks, mountains and seasonal transformations strongly suggests that she is a character in mythology than a divine embodiment of place and time. In this sense, the Cailleach might be a survival of an animistic belief system where the land itself is personified and sacred. The Cailleach is not confined to Ireland alone. She also appears in Scottish folklore as the Cailleach Beara, often pronounced as Cailleach Bear. A blue-faced hag who rules over winter, wields a hammer to shape the land, and is often portrayed as both terrifying and awe-inspiring. She leaps from hill to hill, washes her plaid, or tartan shawl, in the whirlpools, and controls the onset of storms. In Manx folklore on the Isle of Man, a similar figure known as the Cailleach is associated with wild weather and seasonal change. These parallels suggest a deeply rooted pan-Gaelic tradition, perhaps in pre-Celtic in origin. The reoccurrence of such a being across multiple regions points to the Cailleach as a type of archetype, a foundational spirit figure who expressed the ancient people's understanding of the land's mystery and cycles. In some Irish tales, the Cailleach appears not as an isolated hag but a manifestation of sovereignty. The spirit of land who grants kingship or withdraws favour. This theme is echoed in stories of the Cailleach is transformed into a beautiful maiden once recognised and honoured, linking her to the well-known sovereignty goddess motif of Irish mythology. Such transformations hint at the archetype of the triple goddess, maiden, mother and crone, a cycle of youth, maturity and age representing the stages of life and the agricultural year. In these stories, the Cailleach is merely the end of life or the embodiment of barrenness, but part of a cyclical whole. She is winter, yes, but winter is a stage of rebirth. Without her, the land cannot rest, seeds cannot germinate, and spring cannot return. In this sense, she is an agent of transformation, not destruction. Some mythic figures, such as the goddess Bowen of the River Boyne, or Danu, the shadowy matriarch of the Tuatha Dé Danann, may reflect earlier phases of the same archetype, goddesses whose roles became separated or softened over time, while the Cailleach retained her raw, weather-beaten edges. Several megalithic sites in Ireland are associated with the Cailleach, suggesting that her veneration may have roots in the Neolithic and Bronze Age ritual. One of the most famous is Slieve na Cally, or Mountain of the Cailleach, in County Meath. This site is home to the Loughcrew cairns, ancient passive tombs aligned with the equinox sunrise. Local folklore claims that the Cailleach built these cairns by carrying stones on her apron. When she stumbled, the stones fell, forming the hills and tombs. This fusion of myth and megalithic landscape suggests that the Cailleach was not seen as not only a land goddess, but also a builder of the sacred. Her presence at sites aligned to celestial events implies a cosmological awareness, a sense that time, space, death, and fertility were all interwoven. Over time, as Ireland transitioned through Christianization and social change, the Cailleach remained. No longer worshipped perhaps, but never forgotten. She lingered in the tales told beside hearths, in place names across the island, and in the sayings of farmers who gauged her moods in the weather. Like many ancient deities, she was not overthrown but absorbed into folk belief, stripped of her divinity yet retaining her essential power. Today her presence is felt not only in myth and landscape, but also in the resurgence of Irish paganism, where she is honoured as a goddess once again, albeit in a new and evolving ways. If the Cailleach is the face of the land in its wildest, most ancient form, then she is also its heartbeat, marking time through the cycle of seasons. Among her many roles in Irish pagan tradition, one of the most significant is her function as a sovereign of winter and guardian of the threshold of times between seasons. She is not a goddess of death in the funeral sense, but rather of dormancy, rest and eventual renewal. Her reign begins at Samhain, grows strong through the dark months and begins to falter as the bright half of the year returns. To understand the Cailleach's seasonal cycle, it not only reveals how ancient peoples tracked the rhythms of the natural world, but also shows how deeply Irish paganism intertwined cosmology, agriculture and mythology. The year in which the ancient Irish calendar began at Samhain, the festival that marks the end of harvest and the onset of winter, is a liminal time, a moment when the veil between worlds is thin, and the boundaries between life and death, human and underworldly, blurred. It is no coincidence that the Cailleach's power awakens at this moment. According to our lore, Samhain marks the beginning of the Cailleach's rule. She awakens for her summer slumber. Some say she rises from beneath the earth or emerges from a cave and takes control of the land. With her staff or hammer, she strikes the ground, turning leaves into frost and calling down the first storms. In some parts of the country, she is said to ride across the land, wrapping it in mist, snow, and silence. Her dominion is absolute, and she walks freely through the darkness, shaping terrain and spirits alike. In this way, the Cailleach is not just associated with the season of winter, she is winter. And like the season she governs, she is necessary. Her arrival marks the descent into the underworld of the year, the composting time, when all that has bloomed must decay to nourish what will bloom again. At Imbolc, the first signs of spring begin to stir beneath the frost. Traditionally celebrated as the Feast of Breed, Imbolc heralds new life, fertility, lambing season, and the gradual return of light. In Irish pagan tradition, this is the beginning of the contest between the Cailleach and Breed, two powerful female figures representing opposing yet complementary forces. One of the most enduring folk traditions tied to the Cailleach comes from the weather lore surrounding Imbolc. On this day, it is believed that if the weather was bright and clear, it meant that the Cailleach had gone to gather more firewood, a sign that she intended to prolong winter. If the weather was bad and stormy, it meant that she was asleep or too tired to maintain her grip on the land, and spring would soon prevail. This belief mirrors the idea found in Scottish lore and American Groundhog Day, in which the behaviour of an animal or figure predicts the length of the season. The Cailleach and Bridget are not so much enemies as they are archetypical opposites in an eternal dance. The winter crone yields to the maiden of spring, but not without resistance. This tension is part of the larger cosmological cycle, one that reminds us that death precedes life, cold precedes warmth, and wisdom often precedes growth. As the land warms and flowers bloom, the Cailleach's power wanes. Bealtaine, the festival of fire and fertility, is traditional time when her rule comes to an end. In some versions of the lore, she turns to stone or disappears back to her mountain or cave. In others, she transforms into a young woman, possibly Breed herself, suggesting a cycle of rebirth or transformation rather than simple exile. This aspect of the myth ties directly to the sovereignty goddess tradition, in which the land is personified as a woman who can appear as either a hag or a maiden. In certain Irish legends, a would-be king must kiss or embrace a hideous old woman to prove his worth, and in doing so she transforms into a radiant beauty, revealing herself as the spirit of the land. The Cailleach's winter rule, followed by Breed's spring sovereignty, may be two phases of the same sacred female power, each necessary, each honoured in turn. The cycle of sound, Imbolc Bealtaine, represents more than just changes in weather. It forms a sacred drama that mirrors the agricultural and spiritual life of the people. The Cailleach's appearance at Samhain reflects the importance of rest, roots, and darkness. Her softening at Imbolc mirrors the stirring of seeds in the soil. Her retreat at Bealtaine opens the door to fusinity, fire, and growth. This cosmological model is cyclical, not linear. The old is never destroyed. It is transformed. The Cailleach does not die, she sleeps. She does not lose power. She lends it to the land. In this, she teaches a deeply pagan lesson. All things turn, and the end is also the beginning. Modern pagans often look to the season cycles as metaphors for inner transformation. In this context, the Cailleach represents more than winter. She becomes a guide through the dark night of the soul. Her reign invites introspection, letting go, healing, and the wisdom that comes from sitting with silence and shadow. She is the keeper of rest, the guardian of sacred endings. Her season transitions thus speak not only to farmers and weather watchers, but anyone seeking a deeper rhythm in life, one that embraces not only the light, but also the necessity of darkness. In the Irish imagination, the landscape is not inert. It breathes with memory, myth, and presence. Rivers are born of sorrow, stones are echoes of ancient battles, and mountains carry the names of goddesses and heroes. Nowhere is this clearer than in the mythology of the Cailleach, the divine landshaper who sculpts the very bones of Éire with her hammer, her apron, and her footsteps. In her, the terrain becomes sacred, storied, and profoundly female. Rather than being associated with a specific tribe or region, the Cailleach is a trans-regional being who transcends human lineage and history. She is the embodiment of the land's antiquity, its age before people, its elemental past. In local traditions across Ireland, she is credited with forming cliffs, mountains, stone fields and cairns. Her myth offering an imaginative explanation of Ireland's often dramatic and glacially sculpted geography. In this, she acts not only as a goddess of winter or time, but also as a geomythic force, a cultural expression of deep time, of a landscape shaped by the process too slow and vast for early humans to understand, and thus mythologized true story. One of the most famous locations associated with the Cailleach is Slieve na Cailleach, or Mountain of the Hag in County Meath. Atop this hill stands the Loughcrew cairns, a collection of passage tombs dating back to the Neolithic period, circa 3500 BCE, predating even the Egyptian pyramids. Local folklore claims that the Cailleach created these cairns by carrying stones in her apron and dropping them across the landscape. In one version of the story, she leapt from hilltop to hilltop, building a series of mounds in a single day. When she stumbled and fell, these stones tumbled from her apron, forming the final cairn, in which she was turned to stone and remains to this day. The largest cairn, Cairn T, is astronomically aligned to the rising sun on the spring and autumn equinoxes, when sunlight penetrates the inner chamber and illuminates spiral carvings at the back stone. This alignment, combined with the Cailleach lore, reveals a symbolic connection between death, time, the cosmos, and feminine power. She is not only a builder of tombs, she is the guardian of sacred time, marking the balance between light and dark. On the western edge of Ireland, in County Cork, the rugged Beara Peninsula is home to another ancient itineration of the Cailleach. On Cailleach Beara, the Hag of Beara. Here she is more than a seasonal deity. She is a sovereignty elder of the land, a water maker, and a symbol of endurance. A stone, known as Mhór na Cailleach, the Hag's Road, is believed to mark the path she travelled. Perhaps the most famous local relic is the Hag's Head, a rock formation near Kilcatran that resembles a hooded woman gazing out to sea. This stone is said to be the Cailleach herself turned to rock as she waits eternally for her youth and vitality to return, a local telling of her seasonal cycle. There is also a Sheila na Gee figure in the local Kilcatran church, sometimes associated with the Cailleach as a pre-Christian fertility guardian, showing the blend of sacred female archetypes through stone, weather and story. The image of the Cailleach carrying stone in her apron appears in multiple regional variants. In some tales, the stones fall and form mountains. In others, they form passage tombs or ridges. The apron, typically a domestic garment, is transformed into a cosmic tool, a container of earth, time, and transformation. The act of dropping stones is symbolic of land creation, but also of death and burial. Stones cover graves, form dolmens, build cairns. Thus, her apron becomes a mythic container for both fertility and finality. She brings form, but also marks the end. The fusion of the domestic, the apron, and the geological, stones, underscores how Irish paganism sees no separation between the sacred and the everyday. The feminine force that bakes bread also carves mountains. The Cailleach's staff or hammer is another potent symbol. In various stories she uses to strike the ground and bring frost, freeze the earth, solid for winter, create ridges, boulders and rock formations, turns herself to stone or casts enchantments on the land. The staff is often compared to a druid's wand or smith's hammer, reinforcing her role as a creator, shaper and wielder of elemental energy. As the smith shapes metal with fire and force, so does the Cailleach shape Ireland with wind and stone. In many tales, the Cailleach is not just the shaper of the land, she is the land. Mountains are her bones, rivers her veins, rocks her teeth, and caves her womb. This animistic worldview, central to Irish paganism, sees the earth as a living being, infused with spirit and personality. To walk upon the land, then, is to walk upon her body. This worldview calls for reverence, not domination, a relationship with the landscape rooted in respect and interconnection. In this, the Cailleach serves not only as a mythic explanation, but as a moral teacher. Some scholars have speculated the stories of the Cailleach, especially those involving our forming, rocking and glacial terrain, may be mythologized memories of the last ice age. As glaciers retreated, leaving behind scattered boulders, barren ridges and heaped stones, early peoples may have explained these vast forces through the image of a mighty woman who dropped them as she walked the land. Thus the Cailleach preserves not just a spiritual truth, but an ecological memory, a folk record of ancient geological process carried forward through story. In the ancient cosmology of Ireland, weather was not simply the result of atmospheric pressure or ocean currents. It was personal, intentional, a reflection of divine moods and mythic actions. Storms did not merely happen, they were stirred. Frost was not random, it was cast like a spell, and the heart of the world view stood Cailleach, the hag of the winter, whose breath chilled the air and whose steps summoned thunder. More than a seasoned sovereign, she was understood as a mistress of weather and of time itself. A figure whose presence was felt in every change of wind, every snowfall, every liminal dusk and dawn. From the western coast to the inland mountains, tales of the Cailleach, controller of the weather, abound. She is described as casting frost by striking the ground with her staff, summoning storms by washing her cloak in the sea, causing thunder and lightning as she leaps from hill to hill, calling snow and hail from the mountains with a cry or chant. In these tales, weather is not mechanical but magical. The Cailleach, the agency of the elements, is absolute. This made her both feared and respected. A being who could bless the land with snow to nourish spring crops and devastate it with prolonged cold. She was neither malevolent nor benevolent. She simply was, much like nature itself. In several Scottish and Irish traditions, the Cailleach is said to wash her plaid or shawl in great bodies of water. Most notably at the Cailleach whirlpool between the Isles of Jura and Scarborough in Scotland. As she washes it, the seas churn and crash for days, and when she is finished and hangs the plaid to dry, it turns white, and thus snow is spread across the land. This story combines seasonal symbolism with mythic weather behaviour. The plaid, a woman's garment, becomes the agent of winter. The image of a crone wringing out a flood from her cloak is visceral, a reminder of how closely early Irish and Gaelic societies watched the skies and tides for signs of the coming season. A similar tradition exists along the Irish coast, where whirlpools or wild inlets are said to be the washing basins of the Cailleach. These tales reinforce her sovereignty, not only over land and air, but over water, especially the dangerous liminal places where sea and shore blur. As discussed in the previous chapter, Imbolc was seen as a turning point, not just for agriculture, but for weather. It was believed that on this day, the Cailleach would access her stores and energy. If the weather was clear and bright, it meant she had gone out to gather firewood and planned to extend winter. And if the weather was dark and stormy, it meant that she was either asleep or exhausted her power, and spring would come soon. This folk belief reveals a deep psychological and agricultural dependency on weather signs, and a sophisticated symbolic system that used mythic personification to interpret natural cycles. The Cailleach was a predictive figure, used by communities to reckon time and make decisions. Beyond immediate weather lore, the Cailleach is also to be interpreted as a keeper of seasonal time, possibly linked to an ancient calendar systems. Her season arising at Samhain, withdrawal at Bealtaine, and symbolic presence at Imbolc and Lunasa correspond to the major cross-quarter festivals in the Celtic year. This suggests that she may be part of an older cosmological system in which the year was divided not only by solar cycles, but by agricultural and atmospheric shifts, marked mythically by her movements. At Loughcrew, the equinox alignment of Cairn T, her legendary tomb, reinforces this. As the sunlight enters the tomb and illuminates ancient carvings, it echoes the idea that time itself is turning, and that the Cailleach, though sleeping, still guards the doorway between light and dark. On a metaphorical level, the Cailleach weather powers can be understood as reflecting internal states, particularly storms and silences of the human soul. Her snowstorms are not just meteorological, they are emotional. Her mists, her floods, her biting winds all resonate with the liminal presence of grief, reflection, dormancy and transformation. Modern practitioners often invoke the Cailleach not just to change the weather outside, but to move through weather within, calling on her to help clear spiritual fog, endure emotional winters, or summon inner stillness. In this way, she becomes a spiritual climatologist, guiding us not only through outer storms, but through periods of darkness, isolation, and the eventual return of light. Perhaps one of the most misunderstood aspects of the Cailleach is the tendency to cast her as harsh or cruel, an evil witch who brings destruction. But Irish pagan tradition does not divide the world into tidy binaries. The Cailleach brings snow, yes, but it insulates seeds. She brings cold, but it kills parasites. Her storms test us, but they do not strip away what is no longer needed. She is not evil, she is essential. To fear her is to fear nature's indifference. To honour her is to recognise our place within a world that is bigger, older, and wilder than ourselves. Though the Cailleach's origins lie in pre-Christian cosmology and in the mists of deep time, her presence did not fade with the arrival of Christianity. Rather than being banished entirely, she was absorbed, reimagined, and carried forward into the living oral traditions of rural Ireland. As cosmological structures of old pagan belief gave way to Christian theologies, the Cailleach, like so many ancient figures, survived not through formal worship, but through story, place, idiom, and season observation. In this part, we examine how the Cailleach endured a living mythological figure, shape-shifting through generations to become a folkloric character, a weather omen, a landscape spirit, and even a faint memory of sovereignty goddess once revered. One of the most enduring traces of the Cailleach lies in the very geography of Ireland. Her name is embedded in hills, mountains, stones, caves, and valleys across the island, evidence of once widespread reverence of and familiarity with our mythos. Examples include Slieve na Cailleach, or Mountain of the Hag in County Meath, Ceann na Cailleach, or Hag's Head, the southernmost tip of the Cliffs of Moher in County Clare, Loch an Cailleach, found in several counties, Cairn na Cailleach, or Cairn of the Hag, often marking hilltops or burial mounds, and also in Cork itself you have Labba na Cailleach, the bed of the Hag, which is the largest wedge tomb in Ireland. These tombs are more than geographic labels, they are mythic landmarks. They localise the Cailleach, grounding her power in specific terrain. Her body is the land, and these place names preserve not only her memory, but also the sacred geography of the old world view. Across Ireland, the Cailleach appeared in folk tales as an unpredictable and powerful old woman, sometimes fearsome, sometimes wise, and occasionally trickster-like. She might appear as a lonely crone offering cryptic advice, a shape-shifting woman who tests a young hearer or farmer, a supernatural being guarding treasure or sacred places, an old woman who turns to stone at dawn, or a personification of the harsh winter wind or sudden storms. One particular trope is the testing hag, in which a man, often a prince, soldier, or wandering youth, encounters an old woman in distress. If he treats her with kindness and respect, she transforms into a young maiden and rewards him, echoing the sovereignty goddess motif from the earlier chapters. And if he mocks or rejects her, he is cursed or left wandering. These stories function as moral instruction. Honour the old, respect the land, recognise the divine in the hidden or the lowly. In the Irish language and its regional dialects, the Cailleach lived in idiomatic expressions. Tá sé fuair mac scarnach na Cailleach, it is cold as the Cailleach's throat. Neach mé riamh an Cailleach mar seo. I've never seen the hag like this, which meant the weather or situation. Tá an Cailleach a muine no. The hag is out today, referring to the stormy weather. These phrases reveal a cultural familiarity with the figure, not a distant myth, but as a personified force present in everyday life. In farming communities, her moods are watched closely. A sudden frost may be blamed on the Cailleach's mischief. A failed crop could be a sign that she has not been honoured, even unconsciously. These superstitions, part protective, part explanatory, reinforce her role as an agent of natural balance. With the coming of Christianity, many pagan deities and spirits were either demonised or recontextualised. The Cailleach, however, was rarely framed as evil in Irish folk tradition. Instead, she was diminished in scale, from goddess to witch, from shaper of the land to local weather woman, yet still retained her mysterious power. In some regions she is said to be a nun or a hermitess from the early Christian era, blending the sacred feminine archetype with acceptable religious forms. In others she was linked to the fairy lore, one of the Aishi, the old gods driven underground. This fusion allowed her to survive. Rather than confronting the new religious order, she slipped beneath it, hidden in story, stone, and superstition. Several stories describe the Cailleach as being reborn again and again, growing young each spring, growing old in winter, and returning eternally. In Munster lore, she drinks from a sacred well or lake to regain her youth. In Connacht, she transforms into a deer or hare and flees to the mountains of Bealtaine. These shape-shifting tales suggest not only immortality but cyclical time, a deep-rooted belief that life does not end but renews. The land, like the Cailleach, sleeps and wakes, dies and returns, always changing form. Her animal forms, especially deer, hares and crows, link her to otherworldly knowledge, liminality and seasonal transition. Even as her image softened into folk stories, her symbolic potency remained. Despite her demotion in cultural hierarchy, the Cailleach remained close to the people, especially rural women. She was not a temple goddess, but a presence at the heart, in the wind, in the weather. Her power was quiet, ever-present, tied to the land and the lives that depended on it. She was invoked in storms, whispered about in the dark months, and passed through generations, not with scripture, but with storytelling. In this way, she retained something more powerful than official sanctity: cultural intimacy. While the Cailleach has walked the hills and stories of Ireland for millennia, she has found new ground to tread in the hearts and practices of modern pagans. No longer confined to fading folk memory or windswept place names, the Cailleach has re-emerged as a vibrant spiritual figure in contemporary Druidry, Irish Paganism, eco-spirituality and goddess traditions. Yet this revival is not a simple resurrection of the past. It is a reimagining grounded in modern values, ecological awareness and spiritual need. This chapter explores how the Cailleach has returned as a living archetype, adapted for a new age while still echoing the ancient land from which she arose. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries saw a resurgence in interest of Ireland's mythic and pre-Christian heritage. Scholars, folklorists and spiritual seekers began to uncover deeper layers of figures like the Morrigan, Breed and the Cailleach, not simply as mythological curiosities but as spirituality resonant forces. For many modern pagans, particularly those identifying as druids, witches or goddess devotees, the Cailleach offers something raw and elemental. She is not sanitized, not bound by patriarchal norms, not even nice. She is powerful, ancient and wild, a goddess of earth, wisdom, endings, transformation and resilience. Books such as the Book of the Cailleach by Gearóid Ó Crúlach and Cailleach, Haggard Winter by Rachel Patterson have helped bring her to modern readers with academic rigour and spiritual insight. One of the most significant developments in the Cailleach's revival is her emergence as a symbol of nature itself, especially in the context of environmental awareness and the climate crisis. In eco-pagan and animistic circles, the Cailleach is not seen as a mythic character, but as a spirit of the land, watching, warning and weathering humanity's disruption of natural cycles. She represents the voice of wild places, mountains, bogs, coasts and spirits, the force of natural consequence, storms, climate shifts, dying seasons, and a keeper of ancient wisdom, slow, stone-bound and rooted in place. In rituals and meditations, she is often invoked during the dark half of the year, especially at Samhain, winter solstice and Imbolc, as a guide through personal and planetary darkness. Her presence calls practitioners to reflect on what must die, what must rest, and what seeds lie dormant in winter silence. Contemporary pagans may honour the Cailleach through a variety of spiritual practices. Altars with stones, bones, antlers and dark cloths. Offerings of water, earth, seasonal foods, or hand-collected materials from wild places. Meditations and pathworkings that visualise encounters with her in caves, on mountain trails or in storm-lashed landscapes. Season rites, especially in late autumn and early spring, where her myth is ritually enacted or told through poetry, dance or fire ceremonies. And personal shadow work, where the Cailleach serves as guide through grief, healing and endings. In Irish pagan groups like Cailleach, Slí and Duchas, as solitary paths rooted in the land, the Cailleach is not just a deity but a mirror, a force that helps individuals confront their truth, endure their winters, and find wisdom in stillness. The Cailleach also resonates strongly with those reclaiming divine feminine power in forms that are not conventionally beautiful or nurturing. She represents the crone, the phase of life often erased or feared in modern youth-obsessed culture. To stand with the Cailleach is to embrace ageing as power, not decay, solitude as sacred, not loneliness, death and endings as meaningful, not failures, silence, wisdom and darkness as fertile, not empty. She empowers those marginalised by modern norms, elders, solitary women, LGBT pagans, rural dwellers, by affirming that there is beauty and strength in what is hidden, veiled and ancient. In the age of ecological breakdown, mass extinctions and climate change, the Cailleach speaks louder than ever. Her storms now mirror global upheaval. Her freezing touch feels like a cry for balance. Her indifference to human plans remind us that we are not masters of this earth, but its fleeting guests. For many modern pagans, she is not just myth, but activist archetype, reminding us that nature will always reclaim its rhythms, and that ignoring the wisdom of the Cailleach leads us to imbalance, loss, and collapse. In this light, rituals honouring her become acts of remembrance and resistance, ways to reconnect with the cycles we have forgotten, and to reclaim the humility that comes from knowing we walk on sacred ground. The Cailleach, then, is not confined to the past. She lives in storm and stone, in story and soul, in mountains and in memory. She is honoured not by grand temples, but by footsteps and wild paths, prayers and winter winds, and the deep listening that modern people bring to the old land. Through her, Irish paganism reconnects with something vital. The understanding that time is circular, death is sacred, and the land is alive. The Cailleach walks still, across wind-carved mountains, through frost-hardened soil, in the whispered stories of heart and hill, and now in the prayers and practices of those who seek the sacred in the land. She is not a figure who demands temples or gold. She requires only recognition of the earth beneath her feet, of the cycles that govern all life, and the necessity of rest, endings, and wildness. In tracing her myth from ancient origins through folklore, geography, seasonal rites, and modern spirituality, we come to understand the Cailleach not as a relic of the past, but as a living current, one that pulses beneath the soil, breathes in the storm, and waits in the silence of winter. She is more than a goddess. She is a worldview. One of the most profound lessons the Cailleach offers is that time does not march forward towards progress or perfection. It turns, like the seasons, like the stars, like breath. Life leads to death, and death to life. Darkness is not the absence of light, but its preparation. To know the Cailleach is to know that winter is not an enemy. It's a phase, a teacher, a womb. She reminds us that wisdom lies in decay, and that only by releasing what no longer serves can anything in you truly grow. Her myths root us to the land. Through her, the mountains become ancestral. The stones tell stories. The weather becomes language. Irish paganism, through the figure of the Cailleach, offers not just a belief system, but a way of relating. To place, to time, to the deep inner tides that mirror the turning of the year. When we honour the Cailleach, we do more than remember a figure of myth. We enter a conversation with the land itself, with the rhythms that shaped our ancestors and continue to shape us. In a world spiralling into ecological imbalance, psychological burnout and spiritual disconnection, the Cailleach's voice cuts through like winter wind. She teaches us to embrace the quiet seasons and let go of constant striving. Reverence the land, not as a resource, but as kin. Accept age, endings and change as natural and not to be feared. And to slow down, listen and root deeply in the here and now. Our presence is a reminder that not all growth is visible. Sometimes the most sacred work is done beneath the surface, in the stillness of winter, in the waiting, in the dark. And rise she will, again at Samhain, at Imbolc, in story and storm, in ritual and reflection. She will rise in the voice of the storyteller, the silence of the stone and the breath of the mountain wind. She is not forgotten. she has only been veiled. And now, as the wheel turns once more, we lift that veil and find her waiting, as always, at the heart of the land. Sinead an scéal seo is Mistress de leabhar Seán Tuama. Míle buchas as fuór cuid táma, agus i gcónaí, slán go fóill.